How can you lead a fulfilling life as the model for your legacy? I'd like to welcome Owen Marcus back to the Design Your Legacy podcast this lovely morning. Welcome back, Owen.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Yes, I had reached out to you after our last episode, and a male listener had contacted me, and he had a very specific question about how can men live authentic lives. And I said to you, that's so interesting because there must be an unspoken problem out there. And what did you say back to me?
I said that it really is a problem, I think, with men. We, as men, generally don't even know it's a problem. And if we do, we often don't speak it, and we can get into why. And so this gentleman to reach out for you to you and speak it and ask that question, is an exceptional man. And it's an exceptional question because I think really he's speaking for all of us.
Well, what I think was so interesting in our chat about that in the preamble was you had said to me that he has more awareness to be able to put that into language. Because I said, being that I'm not a man, I said to you, isn't that so interesting that men would even feel the vibe or the frequency that they might be living inauthentically? Like that could be in the back of their mind.
And it gets in the back of all our minds, maybe way back in our unconscious. And several years ago, we did an extensive study with researching the guys that were coming to us. And the biggest takeaway from this study that we did was men did not feel good enough.
Mm.
And another part of that was they thought they were the only one. Yeah. And so, for different reasons, we keep all this to ourselves. But one of the powers of what we do with guys is they start opening up because it's a safe space. But one
Mhm.
of the first things that starts to happen is they start to realize, oh, I'm not the only one. And if I'm not the only one, oh, I'm not all that messed up. And it just starts to snowball in a more positive way once we go down that road.
Yeah, wonderful. Okay, so I've got a list of questions here, and I thought we would run through them to kind of break this down. The questions might match, or you might even add to them, given what you have learned over the years in your research and life experiences, etc. Okay, so what does it mean today to live as a true gentleman, and how is that different from outdated stereotypes of masculinity?
Um, that sort of opens up a bigger question of, yeah, I think we don't really realize in a cognitive way or in a conscious way what we're living in or swimming in, because it's the water we've been swimming in for so long as a culture. It's impacted men and women, but specific to men, we don't realize that we've been limited for a lot of different reasons. And two things sort of are, provoke that awareness of maybe I am often a crisis in
Okay,
a
so let
man's
me
life.
interrupt you for a moment, if I could. Tell me
Sure.
about these waters, because I know Alison Armstrong has talked to me about those waters, but what is it from the male perspective?
Okay. So one of the big things is that we're trained to perform.
Okay.
And we're trained to perform for a lot of different reasons. Starting with instinctually, we, as the hunters of the hunter providers or hunter gatherers, we are the providers, the protectors. And so we are meant to perform, and we need to perform in that capacity. But it's evolved where we see our value in terms of our performance, what we can deliver, what we
Oh,
can produce. And we were a co-creator of that. We've been at the effect of it in a negative way and also in a positive way. And and specifically for men today, it's often how much money can we produce, or how big can our success be, and all the things that men compete with. And
okay.
we
So
don't.
I have to
Go
interrupt
ahead.
you again on that, which I find so interesting because a lot of men I notice when they talk, even if it's about business, they almost use a sports model of
Hmm.
like the number of home runs, the number of the batting at the average at the whatever sports language. Like I'm not a sports is wonderful, but I notice they speak in those metrics, and that it carries over to business and to finances, and then to the car that they own, or the plane, or the boat, or the yacht. Yeah.
And we are competitive. I think that's good, and we actually need to be competitive, and that's one place that sports really serves us. But yeah, men get competitive in ways that start to limit us. And we ask most of, well, 99% of the men that I know and work with is, do you really have authentic, real friends like you did when you were a kid, or maybe in school, or maybe in the military? And most guys will say, no, I have friends. I play sports with them. I work with them. But no. And one of the reasons they're not real friends is because often they're, quote, friends they're competing with, either in,
Mm.
in their same company or job or profession or socially. So it's really hard for a guy in the normal venues to really get honest and vulnerable because there's always this subtle sense of competition. So if I open up and be vulnerable and quote show my weakness, you'll take advantage of me.
So is that instinct or is that conditioning?
Uh, in this case, it's more conditioning. Now,
Interesting.
the conditioning is a function of two things. One of stress and trauma, you could say PTSD, and we're stuck in a survival response, and everything gets to be seen as a threat. So that's a certain kind of conditioning that sort of gone haywire. It's basically hardwired in us, but how we've applied it is more than we need to. And the other conditioning is the cultural conditioning. And some of it's very explicit that we're told what it is to be a boy and a man in this culture. And some of it's very implicit, uh, specifically with the media.
Okay, so let me go back to what does it mean today to live as a true gentleman? Because what comes to mind in an image in my database is I think of something like Brooks Brothers, and that's not necessarily, specific to a certain race or color, but it's more so that would be the definition of a true gentleman, but that could just be advertising. What say you?
Yeah, that is a lot of levels of advertising. And with the internet and all the stats we know about how many ads or even subtle ads or inferences or suggestions that we're giving in a day.
Okay.
I can't remember the number, but it's exponential each year. And so we're overwhelmed by this. And is it a deliberate conspiracy theory? No, but it's it's deliberate in the sense that particularly we see with how social media sets up the logarithm, so it knows what we're looking for, so it gives us that. And we all laugh about that, but that's just sort of the tip of the iceberg. And that's a little more obvious, but that's essentially what we're programmed to see, believe, and want. And because it's the water we swim in, everyone else is swimming in this water, we grow to accept it.
So if you could give 5 words to what a true gentleman is, what 5 words would you select?
Uh, a man that is connected. Now,
Ooh, interesting. Because I think in our last conversation, I said to you, women are always like, connect, connect, connect. We're always looking for points of connection, like the Velcro of the universe, like the glue.
well, we're humans too, and we need connection. So connection starts with connecting to ourselves. And this is true of
Mm,
men and women. But just
okay.
speaking to men, we need to connect to ourselves if we're going to be good at connecting to anything else, from another person to our partners, to our family, to our work associates. But we also need to be connected to ourselves, and we can talk about what that means if we're going to be connected to our purpose and our legacy. Because
Mm.
a lot of, I think, the legacy that we end up propagating is, again, a legacy that is not really authentically the legacy that we would choose if we were really connected to ourselves.
Oh, that's so interesting. Okay. So for those 5 words, I'm hearing connection. And then if to break it down further, connection to self, connection to one's legacy. Could you give 2 more words?
Um, Your legacy is sort of connecting to, I think, your own purpose and, what's your deeper calling and all that. And another connection would be connecting to others, and others is certainly other humans, but really it could be to nature, to your passion, to your purpose, the things that not only mean something in your life, but really give you energy when you connect to them.
I just see a future Brooks Brothers campaign now, the Connected Gentleman.
I'm surprised someone hasn't done that.
That might be the title for this podcast episode. Okay, wonderful. How can a man align authenticity with ambition, especially when you spoke about that competitiveness a moment ago, especially in high performing or competitive environments?
Um, Okay, so this I'm going to sort of back it up a little. And it'll take me a little while to just sort of lay this whole thing out. So, interrupt me at any point. So I think the first thing that has to happen is he needs to be aware, as we're talking about, and he needs to start to get disconnected from the things that aren't authentic or real for him. Number one. And number two, he needs to find a way to connect to himself and what is authentic to him. And so going back to the first one of getting disconnected, it's like he starts to need to sort of back away and see how he's been, you could say, manipulated or disinherited, all these sort of false connections that we're
So,
talking
okay.
about.
So I'm curious. Okay. So if he disconnects, are you speaking from things like alcohol? Are you speaking from things that are more esoteric regarding messages that he might not want to actually buy into? Or,
All that. And so
okay.
it doesn't necessarily mean he completely disconnects. He has to become this guy that never drinks or anything else. But there needs to be some awareness, mindfulness, and deliberate decision. Am I going to do X? Am I going to buy that Porsche because, you know, that's what everyone's doing, and is it really going to make me happy? Because we know we buy things and we're really happy for a minute, a day, a week, or whatever, but it loses its luster. And it loses its luster because it's not really fulfilling what we really want. And so it's being willing to at least slow down the process of a accruement, where you're doing things, you're getting things just habitually without thinking, that you go, is this really going to serve me? Is this really going to give me energy? If I buy more things, at the end of the day, am I going to be happier or am I going to be more stressed because I got to take care of more things?
Yeah. You know what I find so interesting about that is the number of really successful men, like men that I'm intimidated by, and then to find out that they're not happy. And I'm like, how can you not be happy? Look at how successful you are.
Well, and that's part of the problem. This is what I'm talking about. This is what traps men because everyone says to them,
Okay.
well, how the hell can you not be happy? You have X, Y, and Z. And
Look what
then
you've done with your career. I
Right, and
haven't
we
done
mean
that
it
with
as a
my career.
compliment, but they subtly hear it as shaming, and it tells them, "Oh, something's wrong with me. I should be happy if I've done all this and have all this." But that just perpetuates this allurement that, the material world is going to make me happy, and if I'm not happy, I'm really messed up.
Yeah. Well, I think a part of it is the material world of what they can buy with that success. And I think another part of it is the achievement that they have achieved so much that even as a female, I'm looking at them and I'm completely, totally impressed. And then I'm confused. How can they not be happy? How can
But
it
and
be?
other men say that, all that, and they might be competitive with that guy. And so that guy, doesn't have any real room to get honest. And that's why something like YPO, Young Presidents Organization, or EO, Entrepreneurial Organization, and all particularly our things, which were more focused on the connection and the authentic emotional connection than all the performance. And so guys are hungry for environments where they're emotionally safe. They can drop their mask, you can say their ego, their competitive part, and get real. We all want that and we all need that. And to go back to what I'm saying, we can't really, in terms of building our authenticity, we need to connect to ourselves. But in connecting to ourselves, we probably need, and certainly is a lot easier and quicker and more fun, if we do it with other men that are on the same path.
Yeah. So it sounds like the first step is awareness because once they have the awareness, if birds of the same feather flock together, they'll sooner or later in frequency meet other males where they can connect to and it is safe.
You're right. With that awareness, you're a lot more likely to meet that. Now, the reason we don't go to that awareness because the first thing we become aware of is the pain.
Oh, I was going to ask you if shame is
Well,
then also.
shame, fear, anger, sadness. I mean, all these sort of intense emotions that we've been trained, and a lot of this is training. Some of it's stress, trauma, and PTSD, but a lot of it's cultural. for men, it's not okay to feel, and it's certainly not okay to express these vulnerable feelings, including joy too, sometimes, into, a conversation.
Oh, I find this just so interesting I because especially successful men, not all, but some of them they live in a very small bubble
Hmm.
because if they have a position in life, whether they are an executive or a business owner, then they know that eyes are on them. So then where do they, but then again, it comes back to courage. Because if they make the
Hmm.
choice and they put their foot down and they say, I'd like more connection and I'm going to make it through, the hero's journey, the rite of passage, no
Hmm.
matter, the scrapes along the way because as we all know, sometimes when we change, the people around us can become worried because they think, oh, we're going to lose that person, but it's just you're going to reconnect with them differently.
Hmm.
Or you might lose them and they're going to connect with some new people and you might have an invitation to grow to that new place of deeper connection.
100% right on. And that's a great point and this is one of the reasons that I think people, certainly men, are inhibited to go down that path because they're afraid they're going to lose certain relationships. And they might. Most of the time they transform with them. Sometimes you lose them and that's a little rocky, but then you realize, it wasn't a healthy relationship. It was codependent, it was enabling. I was rescuing this person. It was all these things where at the end of the day, you weren't getting energy from it, and really they weren't either. They might have talked the talk, but they weren't really walking, and they weren't changing, and you were just, you know, pouring money down a hole that was not producing anything.
Okay, that's so interesting because, and I'm going to bring up Allison Armstrong right now, where she had said that sometimes men want to be the hero, but in that triangle that you just talked about, I think it's like hero, victim, villain,
Rescuer.
something. Yeah, I don't know exactly the name of it. Um, but I know that that is something that we're asked to grow out of. Like if someone is playing the victim, we're asked to like have a new relationship dynamic. And yet I know Allison said one of the greatest compliments, and I don't throw this around. So, but I know when she said one time one of the greatest compliments to give to a man is to say, "You are my hero."
Yeah, and that's a good question. So it's called the drama triangle, and there's 3 points
Okay,
in that triangle.
okay,
And it's the persecutor,
mm,
the victim, and the rescuer. And what happens is, and men are great at this, and we're trained to be this, we end up being the rescuer.
mm,
And in this model, what happens is, we're the hero, and in this level, I mean, there's two levels of hero. And so in this less functional level, this guy comes in thinking I'm the hero, I'm going to rescue you, and I'm going to keep giving you money and whatever. And at some point, if you're the victim, you're going to turn on me.
why? Is that like what they say about like if you see a cute dog that's been abused, the dog's going to bite your hand at some point?
No, I think it's what it is that in this classical sense, if you're the victim and there's some other persecutor that's persecuting you, every time you try to stand up, you get hit down, and I come in and keep rescuing you, you're going to get pissed at me. You're going to get pissed at me because implicitly, I'm telling you that you can't do it. You're weak. You're incapable of taking care of yourself, number one. And two,
Mm,
that I'm safe to get angry at. It's not safe to get angry at your persecutor. Well, you really need to get angry at because anger, in this sense, serves a purpose. All these emotions serve a purpose, and anger serves a purpose in that it prevents violation and gets back what was taken in a violated way. And
mm.
so, rather than get appropriately angry and assertive and protective and whatever else you need to do for yourself, towards the persecutor, you get mad at me because I'm safe and I'm rescuing you. And implicit in that, I'm saying that you can't handle yourself. You can't do it yourself. You're weak.
So I think what you're saying is there's an unintentional crippling.
Right.
Interesting. So that hero thing works, but it has to be functional.
Right. And so, in that sense, me being a hero there, yeah, I'm not helping you and I'm not helping me. And I got to look at why I'm doing that because I'm a co-creator. It's 50 you, 50% me, or maybe 100, whatever. But we're creating this sort of enabling relationship. So that kind of hero is a dysfunctional hero.
Interesting. What about, and I know I'm going off script a little bit, but what about if one of the parties truly can't help themselves? And what I'm thinking about is Dr. Ramani. She talks a lot about narcissism, and some
Mhm.
people will say, "Well, just leave," whether it's a business, a personal situation, etc. And she, coming from the Indian culture, she says sometimes people cannot leave.
Uh, I think it's really hard. Uh, we can talk about all those
Maybe
circumstances,
awareness is the first step because with awareness,
but
someone,
it's yes. But if you're again that victim,
hmm
there's a subtle but powerful distinction from me rescuing you and you asking help.
hmm
If you come to me and say, Owen, I need help with this, you're empowered. If I rescue you, I'm the power person. I'm again simplifying and assuming that you don't need that you can't do it on your own. So that's part of it. But yeah, you get the abusive woman, the classic is a woman that's being abused,
or
and you
male. Go
and you
ahead.
get the what's called the fawn effect. So
hmm
in therapy or in PTSD work, you got fight, flight, freeze, and then over time, it's sort of like the freeze becomes a fawn. So you become weak. You get the Stockholm syndrome,
You learn
where
helplessness.
you take care of the persecutor
hmm
because that's how you survive. And and what people have to realize, that is a survival instinct. That is a natural, instinctual survival instinct. And so, yes, if you're in that kind of situation, there might need to be some disruption, like literally taking you out of that situation and sort of helping you like deprogram yourself and heal and get your power back. Uh, but those are the more extreme situations.
Yeah, they're extreme and they're all around the world today. Yeah, I appreciate that you're basically teaching other people how to fish, and I appreciate that I am providing the space for you to speak into this because I think that sometimes, like when Dr. Ramani talked about that, I think sometimes as one's awareness increases, then they can start to see the possibilities in themselves and others and open doors around them to then find new ways to walk down
Right.
another street to break the pattern.
Well, and I think particularly with women, but it's there with men. We don't realize how much it is, but in a classic overt way, we see it there with women that we all don't have a voice, which means we don't have agency. And so when I work with men, one of the things I teach men to work with men, from psychiatrists to therapists to lay guys, is our work is about taking the guy deeper into his own experience. So we create a safe space. We take him down into the places he's disconnected from, so he gets connected, so he has more agency, more awareness, and sometimes quickly, almost always eventually, he starts finding his own voice and he starts doing things. So we are not doing it for him. We're sort of his guide, and we believe and we support him in doing it himself in consort with us. But he's
Mhm.
doing it. So when he gets it, he knows he's done it.
Yeah,
And
he's built
it's
new
embodied
muscles.
in him, and so it becomes generative in that he can take that skill set and start applying it in other places in his life.
Yeah, 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 that's wonderful. And he's got that proof that he did it because it's his own work.
Exactly, and it's in his cells.
Very nice. Very, very cool. Okay, what's the difference between success as the world defines it? And I think you spoke about that earlier regarding the waters that we swim in, and success that's truly fulfilling and legacy driven.
I think a simple definition for me is at the end of the day, or maybe the end of your life, you feel fulfilled.
hmm
And so you don't have to walk through your garage and see 20 cars in your garage and go, oh, I'm successful. You lie down in bed and go, maybe I didn't achieve everything I wanted today, but how I lived my life, how I engaged with others in life was fulfilling. And I've added value and I've become a model for others. And not just what I've created, but more how I've created it, which is really how I'm being. And I feel fulfilled in my efforts. And maybe even in my failures, I feel fulfilled.
Yeah, that's very cool. I know one of the things that again we spoke about in our preamble is this intention of how can one lead that fulfilling life? Because when they lead that fulfilling life, then that shows other people, what's possible for their legacy, but because they embodied it. And one of the things
It-
I've go ahead.
well, yeah, and that's how we really learn. And that's how we learned as kids. We were voyeurs in learning in kids. You know, like the old saying goes, don't do as I say, say do as I do. And so
Hmm.
kids learn by example. And we all continue to learn by example. And we learn on a very instinctual, nonverbal, somatic level. And so when we sense someone is really changing and they're living their life this way, it's an inspiration. Or, as you said earlier, it's a threat to them. And so, yeah, you will repel certain people or certain relationships, but I see that as a good thing because it wouldn't have been supportive. It would have drained you. And you, as you said, attract the healthier ones, the real opportunities in life, and the ones where you can make a difference.
Yeah, I find this conversation really fascinating because it's like all the pink elephants in the room.
Mhm.
Yeah. I'm going to throw a statistic out there and I've got no like basis for it, but I'm just going to make up that like half of men are insecure out there. And then it begs the question of why are they so insecure?
Well, I would say most of us are insecure in some way. And it goes back to what that study showed us that we don't feel we're good enough, but we don't have a place to speak about it, let alone work it out. And again, just voicing it and having someone not shame you for it, but
Hmm.
go, me too, is
Hmm.
a 180-degree shift for a guy.
Well, I can imagine they can exhale. I'm just thinking about
Yeah.
sometimes if men are threatened by a woman, and I'm not even saying that that woman is in man mode, but he can pit himself against her.
Well, men get, and I think, I'll speak just for a minute. We get threatened when we're not being authentic, when we know we're not being authentic. And it's not about being authentic in every moment, but when we don't feel honoring of ourselves and we get threatened when someone has bigger toys than us, if that's a game we're playing, or
Okay.
maybe when someone's more authentic than us and we know that, we can't compete with them or they're going to see through us or whatever, that's a threat.
Interesting. And so I guess women are fair game, fair targets.
Uh, they are in many ways in all the ways that, society talks about it. But I think sort of what you're saying here is women can be the target when the woman, has her own power, her own agency in her own way. One as a woman and just who she is. And it could be a threat, but some guys sort of like that threat. It's a challenge for them. And and for a lot of guys, particularly when they're younger, and I was there, sex, getting the woman, having maybe not relationships, but encounters, dates, or whatever it might be, is about conquest.
Well, I only bring this up because I remember, and I'm going to go back to the script in a moment of the list of questions, but I just remember Alison Armstrong said that her material that she taught only applied to healthy men. And then I went up to her afterwards because I did like all of her programs in my
Mhm.
early 20s. And I went up to her afterwards and I said, well, what about unhealthy men? And she was like, well, that's about half of society, and I don't cover that here. That has to do with fear. And I was like, oh, okay. All right. So I got half the script or half the story.
Well, and I think what she's saying is don't waste your time with unhealthy men.
Yeah. And I guess what I'm asking you is if there is a man and he is unhealthy, is it because he's insecure?
Yeah, I would answer it. He's unhealthy because he's trapped in some form of PTSD and it's usually an N, into the cultural milieu that we were fed, and he, he's trying to basically survive, and he hasn't been given or he hasn't accessed ways to get out of that survival state. Because when it's like a drowning guy, you don't want to jump in the water and save him because he might drown you.
Correct. Absolutely. I'm quite aware of that. Yeah.
Right. And this is sort of what we're talking about. So is throw him a life preserver, have him grab it, pull him up, and once he gets on the boat, and then then have a relationship. But yeah, it's a co-creation. Women are attracted to unhealthy men, and because in some ways you could say they're unhealthy because again, they might have their own PTSD and trauma and all that. And they're buying into the cultural narrative, which is in many ways a false narrative.
Yeah, it is. It is really false, and I think it's not doing a whole lot to serve humanity's growth. And I'm also thinking about $170 trillion that's about to be ready. It's about ready to be passed to women through inheritances, succession,
Mhm.
a number of other things. And women are oftentimes afraid to even ask the definition of words when they go into their financial planner's office or their wealth advisor's office, et cetera, et cetera. And and I'm just thinking about the dynamics there of if that man is insecure, how does she handle it? And then I'm going to go back to the script because that's just another pink elephant in the room.
Yeah, as we say, and my partner's a couples therapist, and we do retreats for couples and all that. I mean, it's sex and money are like the hardest conversations to have in a relationship because it opens up all our vulnerabilities. But really, again, it opens up not just ours, but the can of worms that we've been fed by the culture.
Yeah.
And so guys, have a certain sensitivity around performing and making money and talk about all the ways that shows up. And women, you could say, have a certain insecurity, which is somewhat is inherited because, as we know, until recently, women got married for security. Now, it started with the birth control, and now it's accentuated with the fact that, women are so successful and they're graduating from school, particularly graduate schools, at a higher rate than men are, that, they have that power. But there's a certain epigenetic inheritance that they have, I believe, around, that insecurity of, needing a partner. And so there's all this stuff that starts to come up, conscious
Hmm.
and unconscious, maybe, epigenetic or whatever, around money and, legacy and prenup and all these other things that it's difficult. And what the stats show is marriages that have a prenup are more likely to be successful than the ones that don't.
Oh, that's interesting because they hash it out in the beginning.
Yeah, because they have the difficult conversations in the beginning. It's just like in business. I've had a lot of businesses, some successful, some not. And when you sit down with your partners and you have a partnership agreement or whatever that is, you got to
Hmm.
hash this stuff out.
Yeah. Well, what I find so interesting is the woman could basically, and then I'm going to go back to the script. What I see is, let's say the woman earns 8 times more, or her net worth is worth 8 times more, but she's like, but honey, please still protect me. I still need your protection. And he's like, well, I don't know how to protect you. You earn and are worth 8 times more than I am. I feel like I can't contribute anything.
I think that's a real trouble, or no, maybe not trouble, challenge. I think there's ways around that.
Hmm.
But in the classic way, yes, both of them are impotent. I mean, they don't know how to have parity in the normal model, but the normal model is disintegrating. But we really haven't created this new model. And I have a friend of mine is actually in that place. He's getting divorced. He's been a successful entrepreneur, but his wife has been that, or ex-wife, soon to be ex-wife, exceedingly more successful.
Yeah.
And it's like, how do they balance that out? And, part of what he did a little more around the kids than she did. So often the tables get turned. And, as you know, particularly with divorce, often a lot of that pent up energy, anger, sadness, fear, and shame is projected onto the financials.
Oh, isn't that interesting? I just have to, and again, I'm going to go to the next question in a moment. I just think about the fact that Oprah Winfrey has survived with Stedman. And early on, she talked about how people would go up to Stedman in the grocery store and they'd be like, ha ha ha, Oprah's money. And he'd have to be like, picking up the celery, putting it in the cart. And they must have worked through it with, I'm sure they had the best therapist. But I do think that this whole personal development conversation, I mean, it has to be had because if it's not, number one, that legacy is going to go to the default, and then it could even be worse. It could be destructive, like we talked about in our last conversation.
Right. And I think the secret there is, in this case, if the woman's making more money than the guy, if the guy is living an authentic life, and we could talk about how to get there, but if he's
Hmm.
living a life where he feels good in who he is, And so I had a woman, an old client of mine, old money, one of the most wealthy families in the country, and and her partner was an artist. I
Hmm.
mean, sheer net worth was in tens of millions of dollars,
Hmm.
maybe hundreds. Uh, and you know, this was many years ago, but you know, he might have been making $50,000 a year.
Okay.
But he loved what he was doing.
Got it. Got it. Just like maybe Stedman loves what it is he does.
Right.
So it doesn't
Right. I
matter
mean,
if he's
so it's
getting,
not about money. It's
yeah.
about, are you fulfilling who you want to be?
Ooh, okay. Many men are powerful in public, Owen, but disconnected in private. How can they integrate emotional presence with outward strength?
Uh, it's like we don't have to give it up, but we have to let go of our attachment, you know, our clenching on this outward manifestation of our worth.
Hmm.
So it's not like you go off and live in a monastery. No, no, you can keep all your toys and your houses or whatever, but don't hold on to them as if that's your value, and put some of that energy and work into sort of going in or going down into the things that you had to leave behind probably to make all that stuff. So it's not an either or, but those are pretty much the clients I get. Um, I have a guy now as a CEO for a big tech company or CE, uh, chief, what is he, financial officer. Yeah,
Okay.
great
Good
guy.
girl.
And but he's working with that of all right. I have all this success, but now he's on a path of I want to be, and these are my words, as successful in my authenticity and my vitality and my physical health, my relational health, as I am in my financial and professional world. And here's the deal. I love working, he's essentially an entrepreneur. I love working with entrepreneurs or maybe C-level executives because what made them successful in its essence as a strategy can be transferred into this other realm of success, which is having a goal, going for that goal, and not being thwarted when you don't make it the first try.
Mm.
And to do your due diligence and go, yeah, is this what I want? Is this how I want to do it? I think so, but I'm not going to know until I try. And you try and you keep making adjustments as you go. That's what a successful entrepreneur does, but that's what a successful man does, when he starts to live an authentic life. He's willing to take risks and willing to make mistakes because as Bucky Fuller says, we're not learning unless we make a mistake.
Yeah, absolutely. There's that joke about it only took me 10 years to become an overnight success.
Exactly.
Yeah, I want to go back to something in that question of how can males integrate emotional presence with outward strength? And I want to go back to the two words of emotional presence. What does that mean to you? Because some men, you could say emotional presence and you just spoke advanced French to them.
Yeah, I could use that word. I could use other terms from,
Please.
just being themselves to, being authentic to whatever. But getting there is getting that connection with yourself. So when men usually hear that, they hear it as, oh, I gotta be emotionally aware and connected. And then what they associate that with is, excuse me, I gotta be that like a woman is. And that's one of the first problems because we're different. So how a woman's emotional and emotionally connected is going to be generally different than how a man is emotionally connected and how that emotional connection or authenticity manifests in the world. And so part of the problem guys have with that and resistance, and I think it's appropriate because we can get into how that's happened, but basically, society has told us men that to be emotional, we got to get in touch with that feminine side. And you say that to most men, they're trying to find the quickest door out of the room.
Yeah. Can you, if you would be so kind, can you provide an example of when a man has been, let's say, emotionally present, whether it's a football player or someone on television or a political leader?
Well, there's been some examples recently of some of these professional athletes talking about their struggles with drugs, struggles with their relationships,
Mm,
struggles with, and I used to have professional athletes with clients many years ago
mm.
when I had my clinic, and the struggle with being successful at a young age.
Okay. Oh,
So,
that's huge.
they might even be a teenager or, in their 20s, and suddenly they're making millions of dollars.
Mm,
And I remember when I was, Al Rosen was a general manager for the Giants, who's a client of mine, and we were talking about this because,
mm,
he was a great guy. He really cared about his players. And he saw that, these young guys would come in and one day they're poor and the next day they're wealthy.
mm.
And, and for most people, that's too much. We're not trained to handle that.
Oh, absolutely. Well, there's new decisions and a brand new weight of
And
how,
go back to what you were saying earlier. It's like, who do they talk to? Because everyone says, "Whoa, you're this star athlete, you're famous, you're making all this money. What do you got to complain about? Your life is
yeah,
together."
yeah. Now then, they're back to shame.
Right. And then
Yeah,
where do they go? They go into addiction or whatever.
yeah, to escape.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
it's stressful. Go ahead.
Well, and there's a podcast, and I had the host on my platform in the last year or so. It used to be called I think it's called Celebrity Estates, but it used to be called like uh, I can't remember the exact name, and I might not even be getting the existing name right. He's an attorney out of New York
Mm.
City, and one of the things that he had talked about is um, all of the celebrities, whether I don't know if it's Tom Petty or who it was, but all of the celebrities that escaped through drugs.
Yes.
Yeah, and again, when it comes to the will and the estate, it not a lot of the times, even if there's multiple spouses and different children from multiple spouses, it's not always like the money that they fight about. It's like the bicycle or the baseball cap or something like that. Like it's the so simple thing, but nobody ever stopped to say like, well, how do we check in with Tom Petty or whoever it is? I'm just making up. I don't know if that's exactly Tom Petty's story, so don't quote me or sue me. Thank you. But it's that idea that Tom Petty might not have known to slow down to
Mhm.
say, hey, do any of you children want my baseball card collection? Does it mean something to you? Does it represent me? Because he might not even know to slow down to have those conversations because if he's getting slammed with the pressure of you got to
Mhm.
perform being, in this instance, being on tour or
Mhm.
whatever that thing is, you got to sign the autograph, sign the book, whatever that deal is, you know, yeah.
Well,
Okay.
and with something like these stars, and any successful person, there's a lot of people that depend on that successful person.
That gets even better.
You're right. And so, have you seen that show, Friends and Neighbors?
I have not.
You'd love it.
Okay.
It's an excellent show, and it's right up what you're talking about. So it's John Hamm. It's on Apple. The last show episode that came out last night. And it's about him and his friends and neighbors are living in a very, very wealthy community. And it's about the facade of that community and how he deals with it.
Interesting. Well, in the business world, and you probably already know this, there's something called executive presence. And when executives make it to the C-suite, they're expected to have executive presence and be smooth and measure their words and woo.
Well, and this is what this show is about. And it's well written, and the cinematography's great, and the actors and actresses are great. And it's an interesting twist, which I won't tell you about, but you'll see it pretty quickly. And but it really unpacks that in an allegory. I mean, even though a fraction of 1% live at that level, we can see how the culture not only emulates that, but in all way, or in some way, we're all living in that fantasy, and how that fantasy is a fallacy.
Mm-hmm. That fantasy is a fallacy. Interesting. Because people love the pinstripes.
They love, he has a Maserati. They love all that, and they think because he has this and that, that not only is he successful, but he's happy. And he
Ooh.
comes to the reality that he's not happy. But it took a crisis to bring that reality to him.
Interesting. That makes me think about another movie, a Jerry Maguire breakdown before there is the breakthrough.
Oh, that, uh,
Show me the money, Tom
right,
Cruise.
right, 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 right. Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's yeah. There's been several really good movies over the years about that, and so we all see it, we laugh, we get entertained because it's so true.
Hmm.
But we go back to, living that life because we're trapped in it,
Hmm.
and it literally kills us.
Hmm.
It kills us. I mean, I lost a friend a year ago. Now it's over a year because of that. Uh, and so,
The fantasy of the pressure, or the pressure of the fantasy?
well, the in his case, the pressure caused the stress, and that's even though he was an elite athlete, an endurance athlete, he died of a heart attack. He texted me back in response to a text I sent him at midnight, and his wife comes down to wake him up at 1 or 2 in the morning because he's sleeping on the couch and he's dead.
Hmm. Interesting. Because he couldn't navigate his way out.
Well, yeah, and he had either a heart attack or a stroke. But I'd been warning him for years that you got to deal with your health, and a lot of that is dealing with your stress. And he sort of was, but it has a cumulative effect.
Hmm.
And we don't realize, which medicine's starting to realize more and more, but we still don't really realize that the biggest killer is stress. Now, stress sets up a lot of morbidities, from everything from addictions to maybe the biggest physical morbidity, which is the whole continuum of diabetes, from type 2 diabetes and insulin intolerance and all that, which they're finding is a much bigger killer, and they're calling Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes.
Hmm.
And so we're realizing, yeah, that diet plays a big part of that, but also stress plays a big part, and we are attracted to unhealthy foods when we're stressed.
Of course. Of course.
But a lot of
Mm,
the stress is because we're not living that kind of life we want, and we don't know how to escape that.
yeah. Tell me about the model. You have a model.
Yeah, so the first thing is you sort of realizing where you're at,
Hmm.
and then to some extent extracting yourself enough from it, not
Okay.
completely or literally, but getting some distance where you can start to see how what you inherited and how you survived your family and all these other variables are having you go down a track that you really don't want to go down.
Okay. And that's what you spoke of before. And I know I'm circling the wagons here again.
That's great.
Um,
Yeah, and so I'm just reviewing that. So
yeah.
then,
So they
then,
can
then,
lean out and become disconnected.
right.
Yeah. To what doesn't serve them.
And then it's, once you start to realize that, okay, maybe this is not the water I want to swim in.
Hmm.
And that's a shock for men. And so often for guys, it's like, how bad does the pain have to be greater than the fear of change?
Ooh, that's the tweetable
Simple
moment.
equation. Unfortunately, the pain has to be greater than the fear. And I've seen this for 50 years of working with guys, more in the physical realm when I had my clinic. I had a lot of clients that were physicians. They would say the same thing. I had another business, and my partner in that business used to own dental clinics. And we used to joke, you know, uh, in the dental world, the same thing.
Hmm.
Guys don't, you, generalizing, but often don't do something until they have to do it.
That's like human nature when they're finally backed against the wall and they don't have four different options and they go, okay, I just have to go through this tunnel.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
it's like, I mean, I can give you hundreds of examples of how I saw that. But yeah, and often if they're coming in before it's a crisis, it's because their wife is beating them up. John, you just got to go do something. All right, just to shut you up, literally. And then it opens up something, particularly if they're seeing someone like me.
Hmm.
Oh, okay, yeah, all right, it's not that hard. It's just sort of fun, and they're into it. And then often that guy 6 months later is coming back to Susie and saying, "Hey, Susie, I think we need to do couples therapy. I'm really into this, and I think our relationship could use some work too." And she's going, "What did I create here?" Uh, but to just get back to it, unfortunately, more for men than women, we need a crisis to motivate us.
Hmm.
It could be an
Hmm.
existential crisis, like this life is not really working for me, but sort of like this Friends and Neighbors show, it usually has to be something more real or more intimate or immediate for him to get to take an action. But whatever, he starts to see how big the problem is and how he's been sucked in. And then what he needs to do is to start realizing it and start coming back to his own experience. And now it really helps if he has the appropriate kind of help. So generally, guys, well, people in this culture look at therapy, and I'm not saying therapy is bad, and I think there's a place for it. But there's a couple problems with that. One is that most therapy is more cognitive or analytical, which is sort of top down, which
Hmm.
at first is good because you're figuring out the problem. But so
Mapping it
often what
out.
happens is because these guys are bright, they get it figured out pretty quickly.
Hmm.
So they understand it, they understand the whys, the hows, and all that, but it doesn't change because it doesn't exist at that level.
Hmm.
So then what happens is he understands it. He's going to this quote therapist, a good therapist, but he's not changing. So
Hmm.
that reinforces that something must be wrong with him. Because
Yeah.
a corollary of I'm not good enough is that, oh, these things work for other men, but they don't work for me.
And this was an email you sent to me. Yeah.
Yeah. And so what happens is, in the approaches a lot of guys are going for, and they're trying to change is not how they were. So what I found over the years is we sort of leave that model behind and go flip it and go to the somatic. Because again, if you ask most guys, and I was one of them in the beginning, what did I feel emotionally? I try to find the quickest way out of the room. But if you ask guys, what do you feel in your body? And we explain a little that, your problem is not a psychological problem, it's a learning problem, and specifically, it's a physiological problem because your body is stuck in a survival state. When you're
Hmm.
stuck in a survival state, certain things shut off, and other things that become predominant as they would need to be if it was truly a survival situation.
Hmm.
But what stress does is it puts us physiologically in survival when the outer world really is not a threat, but we're experiencing it as a threat. So we behave as if it is, and we take ourselves out, we take our relationships out, we even take out our businesses because of that.
I'm so appreciative that you're speaking into this. So I've got a question for you. I can provide an example from a female perspective, and then I wish for you to provide an example from a male perspective. So I remember Alison Armstrong talking again. I was in my early 20s when I went through like all of her programs and seminars and materials and books and tapes and everything. Okay. And she talked about, for instance, if a woman isn't like, there's something called the nice list. And the nice list is it would be really nice to have that bubble bath. It would be really nice if I allowed myself to get that thing that's going to make me really happy, but I don't allow myself. But if I do allow myself to partake in that nice list, like it would be really nice when I, got that bubble bath or whatever that thing is. Okay. And then the byproduct of that is now I've got a greater capacity for patience. So when I show up in the world, I am more generous, I am more giving, I notice more, I'm more connected to other people. So for the male perspective, if he can pull out of survival, what is the positive effect?
Yeah, he might be not taking bubble baths, but that's a good point. That
Hmm.
one of the ways that we work with it, it
Maybe he
might be
takes that
secondary.
I'm sorry to
Pardon?
interrupt you. Maybe he takes that motorcycle ride through nature.
Exactly, exactly. And this is what I push a lot of guys to do, and it can be actually the hardest thing. They go do something that's sort of hard on an emotional level. I say,
Hmm.
great. Now your mission impossible, if you choose to accept this, is to give yourself a gift for the hard work.
Mm. I know, and I'm interrupting you again, and then I want you to
Good,
go
I
on
love
with
it.
with
Go.
your example. Okay, I have a friend, and I've even coached him, and he will not even allow himself to enjoy vanilla ice cream at night. We're talking vanilla ice cream could be $5 a pint because he's been a former executive, and that tape in his head of not good enough won't even allow him to enjoy vanilla ice cream, a teaspoon for an evening.
Right. And I've seen a lot of that. And and I've been there and I still work that edge, but the edge of to really receive, and for me to go out, and it's usually something very inexpensive and simple, and it might not be a thing, but an experience,
Hmm.
and like I'll push guys that never had a massage. I've had thousands of body work sessions. I'm a hedonist when it comes to that. It's made a huge difference in my life. But for most guys, it's a push. Yeah, and they can afford it. They got the time, the money, and whatever to go get a massage, but they won't do it.
Hmm.
Or you know, go take that trip you've always wanted to take, or whatever. It doesn't have to be that big, but something simple. Because sort of like your thing with the woman in the bubble bath, we when we give ourselves what we really want, we downregulate, we relax, we have a sense of abundance, and we become more generous, not only to ourselves but to others, and we're not living a life in deficiencies.
Ooh, that's another tweetable moment right there. Yeah, because that's where most of America and the world might be right now, Owen.
And then when we're living a life of deficiencies, we get very protective of what little we believe we have. But
Absolutely.
again, we're in that survival state, so everything's seen as a threat.
Mm,
And
mm,
the media, maybe government or politicians perpetuate it, where they always put us against someone, and
mm.
divide and conquer, make that group over there our enemies.
Yeah, the tribalism. Okay, so a tool is self-awareness, a tool like
Self-awareness,
mhm.
somatic self-awareness. So focus on the physical. You know,
Okay,
basically we teach these guys to be aware of the stress response.
okay,
And
okay,
then they can start changing it. But then the second component, major component, is what I call the communal component,
okay.
which is we're no longer the lone wolf.
Mm,
Because like we were at least inferring earlier, when guys become successful, they lose connection, real connection with other guys. So we're pack animals, we're herd animals, we're tribal. We need, our hunting party to go out because we could we outrun any animal on this planet only if we do it as a tribe or as a hunting party.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
We're hardwired to do things together, but we might be working together in the business, but guys really don't feel like they have, in most cases, a true team where they can be fully themselves, which means imperfect.
mm-hmm,
So men need a venue or community where they can just be themselves, where they don't have to puff up and improve themselves or compete with these guys or feel threatened, where they can just be themselves. And 30 years of starting and running and training guys to run these men's groups, I've seen a huge, huge value in that. I mean, we got guys that literally have said on camera, if it wasn't for this group, I would have killed myself.
Well, because it's like the gentleman that passed away from the stress. It's like if that becomes the escape because they don't know how to navigate, then it's like they're going to just choose to exit stage left.
Yeah,
Yeah,
consciously, unconsciously, or whatever. But some of these guys, and they were vets, and particularly were not all, but most. They were a lot of PTSD, and they healed the PTSD with us. But when you're an officer or a sergeant, and the men under your watch die, you feel responsible.
interesting, interesting. So I'm just going to emphasize a point that the modern man can build a life of connection more than just performance-based approval and posturing. Okay. All right. And so, in terms of habits, practices, and rituals that every man should cultivate to lead a life worthy of respect as well as legacy, can include going for that bicycle, not the bicycle, the motorcycle ride through nature, getting that pint of ice cream, vanilla, whatever flavor, as well as giving themselves that gift as the Mission Impossible.
Right. And I would add all that, find some real friends where you can show your imperfections and they can show theirs and you support each other. I had a guy recently say that, he was on like a hiking trip with his friends, and there were like four other friends, and he did something that most men wouldn't do, but like one night at the campfire, he sort of you broke through the glass ceiling of just normal BS that guys talk about, and he talked about the struggle in his marriage.
Mhm.
And two guys were engaging, and the other two just walked away.
Well, that's the some will stay and some will filter themselves out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the
I'm
two that
actually
stayed really wanted to, they were hungry for that. The other two, I believe, were, but they were just scared.
Yeah, well, that's a good call to see it for what it is. Because again, I know, for example, with like the coaching and advisory work that I do, people aren't going to say to me that they don't know something because they don't want to look bad. And I imagine with men, they're not going to come out and say, "Oh, I feel afraid, so I'm going to exit the campfire scene." They don't want to admit that.
Yeah, I mean, I have that with my brother who, was a Navy pilot. I mean, you know, uh, did things that I certainly didn't do. I don't know if I could do, but when it came to, dealing with the emotions of her family, he would just literally walk out of the room.
Oh, that gets scary, real, and vulnerable. Okay, so I'm thinking of calling this episode "The Connected Gentleman's Journey to Legacy," which brings me to the next point that gentlemen can navigate failure, shame, personal misalignment without losing their center or sense of purpose.
I'm sorry, I don't get the question. What?
Yeah, I'm just stating that gentlemen can navigate
Oh, right, yeah.
failure,
Mhm.
shame, personal misalignment without losing their center or their self
Yeah,
of
they
purpose.
can, but again, they need some tools to do that, tools that they were never seen,
Hmm.
they never had seen, and certainly never taught. And they
Okay,
need a supportive environment to learn and practice that. So one of
okay.
the powers of our trainings and our groups is that, all right, a guy might understand that. You might sort of understand it cognitively and may have some experience with it, but we need to practice it. And practicing it at home for most guys is a challenge because no matter how much their partner is committed to them and their relationship, because of a lot of dynamics are out of both of their controls, it's not always a safe environment for him.
Hmm.
So I'm not making the woman, or even if it's a guy, his partner, wrong or the relationship wrong. It's the culture and the trauma that we've grown into. And a guy sort of needs, at least in the beginning, a place to put training wheels on and just sort of ride his little bike around and practice his stuff so that when he goes back to his primary relationship, he not only has the confidence, but he has the skills. And if he falls down, he knows how to get back up.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, and I'm circling the wagons here again. A couple more questions. What's the greatest danger to a man's legacy today, and how can he protect it?
In my world, the greatest danger is that he's lived an unfulfilling life. So he might leave a legacy of material things, but he doesn't leave a legacy of fulfillment and a model of a life worth living.
Okay. If a man wants to be remembered not just for what he built, but for who he was, where should he begin? You're probably going to say call Owen 555-1212.
Right, right, right. Well,
Yeah.
yeah, he can certainly call me, but I think basically he needs to go on his own journey. You
No
know,
matter his age, and to
no
keep going on
matter
the
his
journey.
age.
Yeah.
I'm in a week or so going to be 72. We have guys coming to us in their 70s and 80s, and we got guys coming to us in their 20s. Now, most of them are probably 40 to 55. But I'm always impressed when it's a younger guy. And everyone else is impressed too. Like, oh, I wish I got into this when I was younger. I would have saved myself a lot of grief,
Hmm.
and I would have been more successful sooner.
Hmm. Okay. Before I read my closing paragraph in one sentence, what would you like your legacy to be?
My legacy.
Yes.
Pretty much what I just said, that I've lived a fulfilling life, that who I was being, along with what I created, but really who I was being, was a model for others, and that I created more value from life than I've taken.
Awesome. And the good website, it'll also be in the show notes, but what is a good website if?
Is mel.com. So it's MEL, no, excuse me, mel.community, and it's MELD dot community.
Awesome. Before I read my closing paragraph, I'd like to thank you again for being a guest on the Design Your Legacy podcast. You brought up so many brilliant points, whether it's just from who men are from the instinctual place of being an animal at their core, or the tribalism and understanding who they are as hunters, but also the socialization piece of the waters that we swim in, and understanding the influence of stress and PTSD on the design compared to the design or the default of one's legacy, in their awareness. And I think that in the consciousness state, people are becoming more curious of what it is that they leave behind and also how they affect other people because it's such an interconnected world today.
Yeah, and I think really at the heart of it, people want to live a fulfilling life.
Very cool. Thank you, Owen.
Thank you.
Okay. In closing, I'm Angelina Carlton, the hostess of the Design Your Legacy podcast, as well as the founder of Legacy Planning, a boutique advisory firm based out of Beverly Hills, California, USA, but international in those I get to consult and coach. I hope to dive deep into subjects that can help a person define, develop, and execute their legacy, and continue to scour the landscape for those who can be great resources to every dimension of your legacy. For many listeners, there can never be enough education and preparation in the moot or moat around your castle. Whether you find yourself with new wealth or generational wealth, may the content on this channel be an anchor in any storms ahead. We do our best to provide original content for your intellectual and emotional curiosity. If you're tuning in on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, etc., please remember to rate and review, share with your family and friends this particular episode, and if you feel so inclined, reach out to Owen or myself via our website, send us an email, let us know your feelings and thoughts about today's conversation, and so again, thank you so much for joining, and thank you, Owen, for speaking into your legacy once again.